Welcome to the Liturgy of the Chalice. Today's Chalice talk is a continuation of our discussion about the Gospel of Mark. This is part 4 of a series. Our next verses come from Mark 2, 15 through 17. And as he, Mar Yeshua, sat at dinner in Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were also sitting with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the scribes of the Pharisees saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When Jesus heard this, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." So here we find it's right after the part in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus tells Levi, "Follow me," and he follows him. He becomes an apostle. Levi is Matthew, the apostle Matthew, who is a tax collector. And there are two people that the scribes of the Pharisees criticized Jesus for sitting and eating with: tax collectors and sinners. So there's a political element here and a purificatory element here. So tax collectors were Jewish people that worked on behalf of the Roman governance, and they collected taxes for the Romans. So they were kind of seen as abandoners of Israel. You're serving the Roman government and not Israel. So to hang out with a tax collector was kind of to hang out with a defector, with a traitor. So they were asking Jesus, why do you hang out with traitors, those who support the Roman occupation of Israel, of Jerusalem? And sinners are all kinds of people lumped together, right? They're people that are just defiled with sin. And the Pharisees were very much about purification, ritual purification. And to hang out with people that were unsavory might mean that they were somehow catching sinfulness, or that just they were seen hanging out in a wrong environment that would make them seem like they too wanted to do those sinful actions. In reality, priests, ministers, monastics of all sorts of traditions, we all make mistakes, and that's all that a sin is. It's making a mistake. So the fact that the Pharisees criticized Jesus for hanging out with sinners, people that make mistakes like you and me, is really quite an egotistical thing to do, right? Because there's none of us that doesn't make a sin, a mistake in God's eyes on a daily basis. So to say I'm not going to hang out with these sinners because I'm just too good spiritually is a really low grade of spirituality, if you can even call it a low grade of spirituality at all. It's the height of spiritual hypocrisy to say I'm not going to hang out for people that do things that I probably do behind closed doors. When really these Pharisees just didn't want to hang out with sinners because they wanted to be seen as above the common populace. Tax collectors was more understandable, and not that it's acceptable because everybody needs a job, but tax collectors were seen as traitors to Israel. So he was seen as hanging out with traitors against Israel. And guess what a traitor to Israel is? A traitor against Yahweh, the God of the Jews, which was also the Abba of Jesus. Abba, the Father, Mother, God, and Yahweh were the same being. They weren't different deities. So the Pharisees, the scribes, the Pharisees were asking Jesus's, head senior disciples, the apostles, why does Jesus eat with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus gives the direct, honest answer. Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick do. I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners. A great spiritual master does not need to hang out with other saints. And it's rare that they do, honestly, because I've had the benefit of hanging out with quite a few saints of different traditions. and they tend to be solitary. I have seen a few rare instances with one saint that congregated with other ones to some extent in my life. But in general, great spiritual personages, great saints, they don't hang out with other saints because the job of a spiritual master is to purify the hearts of their disciples, making them fit for spiritual perfection, spiritual illumination, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. So why would the Master Jesus need to hang out with saints, righteous people, Zadokим, perfected Jewish saints? They're already perfect. What need have they of Jesus? So Jesus said he didn't come for saints. He came for people that need help, like you and me. People who are still making mistakes, people who are still stuck in spiritual ignorance, people who are still stuck in hypocrisy. Jesus came for those that needed spiritual assistance. And that's why he was hanging out with people that the Pharisees looked down upon. They looked down their nose at them. These people were unfit to be taught, the Torah, tax collectors, traitors to Israel, and sinners, these impure people that were not right with God. How could you sit with them and debase yourself? And Jesus said, this is what I came for, to help people to grow spiritually. Mark 2:18-20. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said to him, why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Jesus said to them, the wedding guests cannot fast while the bridegroom is with them, can they? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast on that day. So again, the Pharisees were observing Mar Yeshua and his disciples, and they are particularly observing Jesus to try to discredit him, because the Pharisees represented a certain kind of teaching. We can call it the traditional method of Judaism. And Jesus came not to eliminate Judaism, but he came to renew the covenant between the Jewish people and Yahweh, whom Jesus lovingly called Abba. So every prophet did that, by the way. Jesus wasn't doing something that wasn't done before. I mean, he may have framed his halakha, his teachings, in such a way that was different from other people, and that was different and beautiful, obviously, because we still remember Jesus and his disciples and his teachings thousands of years after the fact. But every great prophet that came, that you read about in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, every single one of them came to renew the covenant between the Jewish people and God, because somehow the Jewish people would fall away from God through some lacking. And this happens when you don't follow the commandments of the Torah. When you follow the commandments of the Torah, you are right with God. You are righteous before God. And when you don't follow the commandments, that is called a sin or a mistake. And this creates a temporary separation of the soul from God. And then you have to do spiritual actions and repentance in Judaism in order to make your soul right with God again, to become righteous. So the Pharisees were teaching in an older traditional way, and Jesus was teaching something revolutionary. He was saying, you don't need to worry about all these outer rituals, but let's purify our hearts. Let's really become good people. And that caused the Pharisees to have a little bit of a stir. So they were watching Jesus and his disciples, trying to find a moment to defame Jesus, as we see throughout the canonical Gospels. So the Pharisees asked, why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? That's what they asked Jesus. And of course, John's disciples are John the Baptist. And after John the Baptist's beheading by the Herodian kingship, many of John's disciples, like Andrew, became Jesus's disciples. So if John's disciples fasted publicly, John was much more ascetic than Jesus was. And the disciples of the Pharisees, our traditional Jewish sect, fast. Why don't yours fast? What's so special about your disciples that they can't fast? And Jesus said, the wedding guests cannot fast while the bridegroom is with them, can they? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast on that day. So what Jesus is talking about here is the Messianic marriage banquet. And the Messianic marriage banquet is what we celebrate through the liturgy of the Chalice, through our Eucharistic celebration. Every Eucharist, really, whether they know it or not, is a celebration of the Messianic marriage banquet. So what is Messianic? Messianic is of the Messiah. We've already talked about in many talks that Jesus preached the Son of Man, collective Messiah. This was a collective communion of perfected saints. So the Son of Man was not just one person, Jesus. It was a well-known Babylonian Jewish messianic expectation, which came from the Babylonian diaspora. And when you read the Talmudic references about it, and other writings about the Son of Man, Messiah, which is taught in the book of Daniel, and later on in the book of Enoch, then you see that the Jews believed that the Son of Man was not one historical being that was the Messiah for all time. It was a corporate reality of purified Jewish people, purified people that followed the Jewish way, that had made their hearts pure, and that had become part of this heavenly collective of saints, or this corporate Messiah, this corporate, anointed, spiritualized humanity. And it is known as the second Adam, a spiritualized humanity, as opposed to the first Adam, which is fallen humanity from the times of Adam and Eve, if you accept that interpretation. But that's what it was. The first humanity tends to be selfish and all about me, mine, and I. The new humanity is concerned about we, the collective whole, the planet, all of humanity, all living beings. So when through Jesus's halakha, what he wanted to do, teaching the Torah and his halakha, which is his interpretation of how to fulfill the Torah, the commandments of God, it was meant to purify our hearts, which would eventually cause a total transformation of consciousness. Jesus didn't come to create a new religion. Paul made up Christianity, not Jesus. Jesus was a Jew. But Jesus did come to transform humanity for the better, to spiritualize it, to make everybody fit to be reborn. Reborn how? Reborn from the first Adam, which is characterized by selfishness, into the second Adam, which is called the Baranash in Aramaic, which is the Son of Man, collective Messiah, this anointed second Adam, this anointed second humanity that consciously serves God. So it's important to understand that when Jesus says Son of Man, sometimes he is speaking about a collective reality, this collective communion of saints in the Olamim, the higher Olamim, spiritual spheres or heavens. And sometimes he actually refers to Son of Man as himself, because each saint or purified soul or perfected soul that is part of the whole Son of Man, collective Messiah. Each one is him or herself a son of man, a son or daughter of man. Meaning you are an individual Messiah, part of the whole Bar Anash, or son of mankind, collective Messiah. And that is the marriage banquet. Whenever an individual soul unites itself, consciously merges into the Bar Anash, the son of mankind, collective Messiah, then a wedding is consummated and a union is had. So this is what Jesus is talking about. The wedding guests, which are his disciples, cannot fast while the bridegroom is with them, can they? So the bridegroom in this case is Jesus as an individual Son of Man Messiah, part of the whole Son of Mankind collective Messiah, the communion of saints. But here Jesus is speaking about himself. He is the bridegroom. And the wedding guests are his disciples. How can they fast when the bridegroom is with them? Here they're talking about Judean marriage customs. And of course, when wedding guests come to the party, the celebration of a wedding, you have to eat, you have to celebrate. Otherwise, the bride, the groom, the family of the bride and the groom will be insulted. They want you to enjoy themselves. So there's great joy when disciples are with a spiritual master. I could tell you it from personal experience. I have a living, enlightened spiritual master. And when I'm with her, there's no other kind of joy than that. Because the vibration of a spiritual master is constant joy. Every moment is a festival, is a divine ceremony. So how can you fast when you're celebrating? When you are with a channel of God, a receptacle of God's consciousness, how can you fast? And that's what Jesus is telling them. How can wedding guests fast when I, the bridegroom, the Son of Man, am here? They're joyous. They're joyous that they have this chance to unite their souls with me, with my teaching. As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. So as long as Jesus is with the disciples, life is a celebration. Every moment is fresh, new, vibrant with spiritual energy and grace. In such a divine celebration, how can anybody fast and be sorrowful? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, when Jesus will no longer be on earth, and then will be the appropriate time to fast. So Jesus is saying something new is happening. Jesus is often referred to as the firstborn. The firstborn of what? He symbolically initiated this communion of saints, this body of saints, of purified beings. He was the first, symbolically, of this Son of Man, collective Messiah. So he's saying that the difference is your disciples fast because you don't have a representative of divine joy with you. John is gone, and John taught differently than Jesus. He did. They had different viewpoints, eschatological viewpoints, and probably different messianic expectations. Jews had many messianic expectations. The Davidic Messiah, the Messiah ben Joseph, the Son of Man Messiah, the Son of Aaron Messiah. There's a lot of them. Elijah coming again was a messianic expectation. So there were many different kinds of messianic expectations, even though the Christian sect tried to make the Son of David, Jesus, the only Messiah. It just wasn't true historically. But Christians buy it because they don't understand the Jewish history that Jesus would have known. So he's saying, I am the bridegroom. I am an anointed one of God. I vibrate God's spiritual power. And there's joy. How can they fast? And the joy, the presence of a true saint, of a true sage, of a true prophet, Mar Yeshua. So Jesus is speaking of himself as the bridegroom, but the bridegroom is also a collective reality. The Son of Mankind, corporate Messiah or collective Messiah, is the bridegroom. The whole communion of saints is the bridegroom. And every soul is considered female to the bridegroom, which is the collective Messiah. So when the soul merges into or has union or marries the collective Messiah, it becomes born again into the second Adam. And that is the meaning of what we're seeing here. Very beautiful meaning. So here we find some very special verses that I really like. And Jesus mourns that spiritual evolution is inefficient, that spiritual evolution is slow. Every spiritual master of all time wants to give totally of themselves. They want to give their full realization to the world, because if only everybody could see the world and experience the world like I do, Mar Yeshua, that is, not me. If only I can give them that joy, that bliss of union with God. But in these next verses, Jesus kind of mourns his present situation, because the certain Pharisees, not all Pharisees, but certain Pharisaical sects were really starting to come at him, trying to defame him, trying to make him look like he didn't know what he was talking about spiritually. You know, why don't your disciples fast? Everybody else's disciples fast. Don't you know how important fasting is? How can you heal on the Sabbath? That's crazy. Nobody can do anything on the Sabbath, etc. So they kept on trying to catch him so that they can make him look bad. And later on, they tried to catch him in certain bad situations so that they can then report to the Herods and to Pontius Pilate and the Roman governance that they had this possible insurrectionist, Mar Yeshua, which we'll talk about later in our talks. Here, Mark 2:21-22, Jesus says, "No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on a cloak. Otherwise, the patch pulls away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and so are the skins. But one puts new wine into fresh wineskins." So what does all this mean? Pardon me. What does all this mean? So whenever you have a tear, of course, nowadays, most everybody buys new clothes. They don't sew on a patch, but Jesus is talking about a patch. So when something tears, when your pants tear or your coat tears, in the olden days, your grandma used to put a patch on the cloak. But before you put a piece of cloth or a patch on an old cloak or a coat or a pair of pants that had ripped, you have to shrink that patch first. You have to make it so it's pliable. Otherwise, if you put a new patch on an old tear, whenever you wash it, it's going to expand in funny ways, and it's just going to create a bigger rip. So here Jesus is saying it's very hard to fix antiquated, broken systems of spiritual teaching. That is literally what he's saying. He's saying that the traditional Pharisees that were criticizing him were teaching in such a way that was like an old cloak that had a tear in it. It was ripped. It was broken. It was not whole. It was not complete. It was not shalem. In putting a patch that is unshrunk on a cloak only creates a bigger tear. So when you try to fix the tear, in other words, when you try and add innovation to an old system, it often creates friction and it creates a bigger rift. And that's what Jesus was talking about here. Jesus was preaching to people that were very aware of Pharisaical teachings. And of course, many people came to Jesus. Otherwise, we wouldn't know his teachings today. But many people opposed Jesus, the Pharisees in particular, and some of the Sadducees too, which ran the Second Temple in Jerusalem. They very much did not like what he wanted. And Jesus tried until the end. He rode in on the donkey. He knew he was coming into an area of danger whenever he rode into the donkey into Jerusalem. It was his last opportunity to preach to the Pharisees in Jerusalem and to the people that followed the Pharisees in Jerusalem to try to convert them to a new way. So Jesus' teachings were revolutionary. They were very powerful. They are very heart-centered. They are not ritualistic. But unfortunately, when you put that new piece of fabric representing Jesus' teachings on an old cloak with a tear in it, it only creates a bigger tear. So it caused a bigger rift. And ultimately, it got Jesus crucified. Jesus goes on to say that no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins. This is a reality in those days when they used to store wine in skins of animals. The new wine represents the new halakha, or teachings that Jesus was offering to very traditional Jews. Old wineskin is the mind of people stuck in tradition that cannot see anything other than the way it is, the way it was, the way it should always be. So when new teachings are put into the minds of closed-minded people, their minds explode, usually in anger. And that's exactly what happened. The Pharisees were very angry that Jesus was getting such an audience from Jerusalem, from Galilee, from Capernaum, from everywhere he went. People followed him because they knew this man was special. He was doing physical healings. He was doing exorcisms. His teachings were something that said that we too can grow and share in the sovereignty of God and the Malkuth of God. Nobody had ever taught that way, not in the same way. And this new wine, which promised the bliss of God, the ecstasy, the drunkenness of God consciousness, it just couldn't fit into the framework of these old wineskins, the minds of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Their minds just exploded in rage that Jesus would even go against the grain, right? And it happens, and the Pharisees weren't necessarily evil at this point either. They felt they were doing God's work. They did. They felt, I'm preserving tradition. This guy's a revolutionary. He's messing up how it always was and how it should be, and things shouldn't change. But unfortunately, or fortunately, actually, in my opinion, fortunately, spirituality has to evolve over time or it dies. Go to any church. Go to any Roman Catholic church and look at the audience. It's a bunch of gray-haired people that are headed for the grave. There's very few young people there. Very few. And that's because they're not willing to evolve with the times. You have to evolve. People are not for the religion. Religion is there for the people. People are not there for the religion. The religion is there for the people. Or as Jesus said, the Sabbath was not made. The people were not made for the Sabbath was made for the people, right? It's made to serve people. So if we're meant to serve humanity, as time goes on, as the world changes, as human sensibilities evolve, religion has to evolve or it will die. And here, at this point in time, some 2,000 or more years ago, Jesus was evolving the Judean religion. He was giving new wine, but the people resisted. And it always happens. Anytime something new comes, God gives a new revelation to humanity, a new spiritual offering to humanity. If that new revelation is based in an older religion, the priesthood or the people that run that religion resist. I used to live in a spiritual community that was very universal, and at some point I was invited to do an Easter celebration there. So I did a ceremony to Jesus on that day, and of course this spiritual place had been around for many years, and they were used to doing things the same exact way every year. And I was pretty new to this community. Maybe I lived there for 1 or 2 years, and I have all these new ideas about how we can celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. And I got so much pushback. How can you do that? How can you sing those songs? We always sang this song. How can you do that ritual? We always did this ritual. How can you meditate like that? We've always meditated like this. They were so afraid to try something new because new wine doesn't fit into old wineskins. People like things to stay the way it is, even if it constricts spiritual growth. And this is what Jesus mourned or bemoaned in these verses, that people are stuck in their old ways that aren't even working for them. It's not causing any spiritual growth. They're actually stuck in the mire of spiritual stagnation. And like pigs, they want to stay in their mud. Eventually, I was able to do everything I wanted to do in that Easter celebration. And one of the people that complained the most, God rest her soul, she's no longer with us. She came up to me afterwards with tears in her eyes, and she said, that was the most beautiful Easter celebration ever. Thank you so much for doing something different. I loved it. So people can change their minds and be influenced by new ideas. But Jesus saw that some were not budging, and he grieved for those that were not willing to look at new ideas. Let us continue with the Liturgy of the Chalice.